Well, take this job and shove it. I ain't working here no more. A woman's done left and took all the reasons I've been working for. You better not try to stand in my way as I'm walking out the door. Take this job and shove it. I ain't working here no more. Well, I've been working in this factory for nigh on 15 years. All this time I watched my woman drowning in a pool of tears. And I've seen a lot of good folks die that had a lot of bills to pay. I'd give this shirt right off my back if I had the guts to say, take this job and shove it. I ain't working here no more.
Years ago, I was working in information technology as a computer programmer. And it just so happened that I was having a bunch of tests run on my small intestine. I was having a lot of internal bleeding. And in order to run those tests, they had to do a colonoscopy. So I had taken a day off to do some colonoscopy prep. If you know what that is, you know it is not a topic that I want to discuss any further. But in the middle of my colonoscopy prep, lo and behold, I get a call from my boss. Turns out that there was a computer issue. A very, very, very minor computer issue, but he wanted it fixed. So he called me. I told him, sir, I'm going to let you in on my zone of confidence here. I am prepping for a colonoscopy. In fact, even now as I speak to you, I am sitting on the toilet. He said, I want it fixed. And as far as your colonoscopy prep, he said, that's your problem now, isn't it? And he wanted me to call him every half hour till the problem was fixed.
Thank you, Pastor Mike. Welcome to Loops. Pastor Mike is pastor over at First Lutheran Church. We're going to bring him back in just a few minutes. But first, we want to bring on our expert. Our expert for this session is Larissa Scott. Larissa Scott married well, and she's also worked in corporate America her entire adult life pretty much. So she has a real depth of experience working with all kinds of different managers and bosses. So let's let her take it away.
When I graduated from college, I had the opportunity to go work at a company in downtown St. Paul. I was working there for about a year when I came into work one day and we had been told that our entire division had been sold off to another company. And so in a blink of an eye, I went from having to work in this beautiful office to rented cubicle space like 3 buildings over. We didn't have any choice in this. We couldn't post into other positions. There was a non-compete clause. So for a period of 2 years, we had no opportunity to move back into this original company. So I went to work for a manager who was based in our corporate office in New York. And so there was basically some redundancy on the teams. We had a team out in New York that was doing pretty much the same thing that our team here was doing in St. Paul. And so there's a lot of natural tension there and a lot of feeling of fear on both sides that one team or the other, or maybe a mix of the two, were going to get cut. And so I was working for a manager who had a very different style than any kind of leader I had worked for before. There was definitely a feeling of competition, a feeling of us versus them, and very much of a leadership style which put her and her team up while trying to push our team down. It was very nerve-wracking for me right out of college to have this experience with a leader and feeling very much on edge at all times, and really being knocked off my game, or the feeling of being knocked off my game by this managing style that was not nurturing or mentoring, but yet undercutting and superior, like there's a superiority to her. I had to make a decision at a point of how I'm going to move forward with this manager to make sure that I could still continue to be successful in my job, and also just not take anything from her that I didn't feel was warranted or fair. And so I came up with basically 3 approaches to how to deal with this management style. And the first one was really to get clarity on the situation. For me, I had to step away from it. I had to take the emotion out of it. And my tactic for this was documenting some of the interactions and talking this through with a trusted mentor to make sure that I could step away from it, take emotion out of the situation to try to understand what was really going on. The second thing that I did is I started to stand my ground and I stopped giving her power. When she would make the comments about working 40 hours a week, it was me really standing strong enough to say, I'm being compensated for 40 hours a week. And it is not in my contract to work more than that. When she was making comments about the quality of our team's work, it was more asking for feedback and specific suggestions or specific examples of what she didn't like so that we could potentially do it better next time. More often than not, it was just a way to throw us off our game and we were not actually doing anything wrong, so she couldn't really come back with anything. But it was really taking that pushback that made her stop that behavior. And the third was trying to have empathy.
We're going to pause Larissa right there before she starts talking about empathy, because the story of David and Saul also has something to say about empathy. So we're going to bring Pastor Mike back on, and he's going to take us a few thousand years back into the book of 1 Samuel.
It involves 2 major players. The king at that time of Israel, his name was Saul, and a young fellow who was kind of coming up through the system. And this young fellow's name was David. Saul would have been David's boss by virtue of being the king. And David is making a name for himself. He is a great army leader. He's had a number of successes in battle. Another thing that was unique about David was he could play the harp. And it just so happened that Saul really enjoyed David's harp playing. It used to calm him down. But one of the things that was so troubling about their relationships was the fact that Saul was to David a terrible, horrendous, bad boss. And it kind of raises the question, why? Well, one thought would be that Saul had a bit of a lust for power. And I think there was some truth in that. Perhaps Saul, too, was one of those people that we might say is a bit sadistic. One of those people who just seems to enjoy watching other people squirm and suffer. Maybe. Saul also seemed to, have jealousy, but that's nothing all that unique. I think another thing too that perhaps Saul suffered from was insecurity. Realizing again that David is an up-and-comer. Sometimes bosses don't handle that so well. But here's the interesting thing. As bad of a boss as Saul was, in fact, Saul even at one time tried to kill David. He threw a spear at him, for goodness sakes. As bad of a boss as Saul was to David, the Bible never really gives us a crystal clear picture of the reasons, the exact reasons. And I think in a very odd way, that might be the point. Who knows why people behave why they do exactly? I've realized in my adult life that the reality is that there is only one person whose behavior I can control, and that's me. And even that might be a 50-50 proposition at best. In the New Testament, St. Paul wrote about this. Paul wrote these words in Romans chapter 7, verse 15. He says, I do not understand my own actions, Paul says. He says, I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing that I hate. So here's Paul, a very committed Christ follower, a man very brilliant, and yet when it comes to understanding his own behavior, he says, I don't understand my own behavior, at least not always. I bet Saul, if you could lock him in a room and look him in the eye and say, Saul, why did you behave toward David the way that you did. He might say, look you in the eye and say, you know what? I don't know. I do not understand my own actions. Now, Paul in the New Testament would go on to say that though he doesn't understand his own actions, he knows why they come about. It is sin that causes me to do those things that I do not want to do, the things that I hate doing, the things I hate about myself. I wonder if, again, old King Saul wouldn't agree with that. I think one of the remarkable things about David, I think David understood that you can't always explain why people do the things that they do. But David, as we learn, greatly understands this notion that he too is a sinner. David is the one who wrote Psalm 51, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." David understood that he was a sinner. I think David also understood his boss, King Saul, also a sinner. And I think that that's what allowed David to learn to come to peace with Saul's behavior toward him. That recognition that he's a sinner, my boss, for sure, but so am I. The word I guess I would use here is the word empathy. I think David had empathy. He could see that the very condition he himself suffered from, this condition of being a sinner, was the very same condition that his boss suffered from. And I say this to you because I think it's true for all of us in our relationships, not only with our bosses, but with our spouses, with our kids, with whoever. How do we understand the behavior of the people around us? Well, again, we can't explain it, and I don't know that they could explain it any better. But I think we would all agree that if we can understand that the same affliction that I suffer from, namely being a sinner, afflicts them as well, they too are a sinner. That if we can have empathy and begin from a place of empathy, that there is hope for a restored and a much better future moving forward.
Thank you, Pastor Mike. That's a glimpse of what empathy could look like in the ancient world. But what does it look like in a 21st century boardroom? We're going to let Larissa Scott have the final word.
Trying to have empathy. At the end of the day, we were both in a precarious situation. Her team and my team were both potentially on the chopping block. And so her fear, or her actions were really coming out of fear. And once I started looking at the situation from her standpoint and understanding that she was coming from a place of insecurity and fear, it made me feel better about my team's performance and our team's, the reaction that we were getting from her. At the end of the day, I have to look back at this experience and say it was positive for me in that it showed me what I did not want to do in my future. Since then, I've had amazing mentors. I've had amazing leaders that I have worked for who have all I've taken from them the pieces of leadership that I would like to have in my future. I want to be transparent. I want to lead with empathy. I want to assume positive intent. These are all the pieces of leadership that I have experienced since then that I have chosen to incorporate into my career now. That being said, it's also important to experience the pieces that I didn't want to be. As unpleasant as it was, I did get something out of that experience, and it made me know what kind of employer I wanted to be in the future.
Thank you, Larissa. Thank you, Pastor Mike. Now, for the last time this series, it is time for us to stop talking and for you to turn to one another and have meaningful conversation about things that matter.
Take this job and shove it. I ain't working here no more. A woman's done left and took all my reasons I've been working for. You better not try to stand in my way as I'm walking out the door. Take this job and shove it. I ain't working here no more. Take this job and shove it.